Hello everyone, Adam Steele here, and today on the channel we're going to be examining the classic rock track Kashmir by Led Zeppelin. Stay tuned. So as you just saw, we've got the new intro graphics, and we're going to be doing a mix react, producer reacts, whatever you want to call it, where we look at another classic track like we've been doing mostly weekly for several weeks now. We're going to be making a long series of it. And today, like I said at the top of the stream, we've had a request from one of our regular viewers who's one of our patrons on Patreon. So thanks, Bill. The suggestion was Kashmir by Led Zeppelin, which is from the album Physical Graffiti. Now, this album is something I've been listening to since I was probably about 5 years old, but I never really examined the way it sounds. So today, I've just downloaded from Qbuzz the 96 kilohertz 24-bit super duper high definition version of Kashmir. The remaster, I believe it's not a remix, it's just a new version of the master tape that has been transferred to digital, so we can hear more than we used to, but they've not actually changed anything from the original mix from the 70s. Now, I can't hear my own voice, so I'm just going to turn this up. There we go. There we go, and so I can hear and not go completely insane. Now, let's go right from the top. Before we do, quickly, I've got Brainworks BX Control here, which is something I'm using to isolate different things on different sides of the mix for you. I've got Ozone 10, which again isn't changing the sound, but we can do if we want. We can screw around with things, and we can isolate parts of an EQ so you can hear what's going on. And I've got Adapters Metric AB currently, which is showing you things like stereo image, loudness, dynamics, the EQ spectrum overall. All sorts of cool stuff. So we can really kind of plan out what's actually happening and show you in kind of graph form and isolate stuff. So without further dithering, let's begin right from the start. 'Cause it looks like this. Oh, yeah, there we go. Here we go. I'm going to stop there because that's already loads going on here. So right from the start, there's a big which is kind of a phaser or a flanger on the drums, which I think they've got on the mixing desk on kind of a separate channel from the main drums, kind of a parallel processing thing so that they can bring in and out of the mix that big wishy-washy thing, which I'm not sure if it's in stereo. It sounds like it might be. I don't think it is. It's just kind of a phantom thing. Let's isolate the mono. So it's definitely right down the middle. About the sides, it's on the sides too, so it must have been a stereo flange of some kind, which would have been fairly cutting edge when Physical Graffiti was released. And something that had been done before with tape machines, might even be a phaser. I can't remember if this is a phaser or a flange unit, but it's very early processing of that kind. And let's have a listen. There's a guitar on one side. I think it's the left. Yeah, so on the left, which I'm isolating now, is that really kind of jangly guitar, which is probably a Telecaster, because Jimmy Page used all sorts of stuff, but it's quite twangy and jangly and blah, 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 blah. Again, that is a guess on my part, but that's the kind of thing I would choose to recreate that sound, because you can do anything with any guitar, but a lot of guitars naturally lend themselves to kind of like this, kind of sitting back in the mix a bit, being quite twangy, not taking over, whereas something like a Les Paul would very much cut through. Something like the song Rock and Roll by Led Zeppelin is a good example of where the guitar is really in your face. That's probably a Les Paul. And on the right-hand side, because the guitar isn't peeking through there, we can hear the drums clearer on that side. There is what I think is either one violin or a pair of violins. There's not very many at this point. And the song isn't very bass heavy. If you look at this graph on the bottom left here, when I press play again, look at the low end, and it's got kind of almost a line from the low end upwards. So it's really been cut out. And yeah, the kick drum doesn't have a microphone really loud in the mix that's kind of isolated. It could be that the whole drum kit is just one microphone, kind of way back from the drums, maybe a ribbon mic or something like that can handle a lot of different frequencies, and then maybe an EQ to lift the high end out as a guess. And in comes Robert Plant, and his voice is distinctly high, but just tonally high. Also, there is no low end in that vocal. There's none on the EQ. You can hear it. There's nothing down there. When I really narrowly isolate the low end here, I'm not hearing the vocal come in at all. I can just hear a little bit of that super steep roll off from the high end in there, and so it's really saturating. There's not much compression on the vocal either, because you can hear him going in terms of the volume of the performance. If it was fairly compressed, it would be fairly level and kind of even though his expression would be quite, a lot kind of blasting certain notes, not blasting certain other notes. Compression would keep it all in one place. The fact that there either isn't any or there's very little, and it's been reserved for the big blasts, which is something I think will have been the case. Maybe something like an LA2A, just stopping it from getting overly, because at one point in here, you'll see it'll dominate the mix. So hopefully there's a compressor there just to stop it from going overboard. But you can really hear how some of these lines barely poke out from the rest of the instrumentation. And there's loads of reverb on that vocal as well. And I think, from the era and the sound of it, that would have been an EMT 140 plate reverb, which is a massive piece of metal hung up in a space about the size of this room, with a kind of essentially a speaker in the middle of it and microphones on either side of it, more like kind of some sort of resonator in the middle, and then almost like guitar pickups on each side. So, transducers and pickups, but the idea being basically like if you were to put a microphone in a room and then a speaker at the other end, and then do that in stereo. But by actually saturating a big heavy piece of metal, it would ring in a certain way that was really musical and really nice. I'm gonna start trying to isolate the sides to see if this was stereo. Yeah, I think it was a stereo version, because when he does the on the big vocals, the reverb unit goes mad, and we can hear it on the sides really kind of ring. Talk of days for which they sit and wait, all will be revealed. And now we get to the first kind of instrumental chorus hook, because the arrangement of this track's really weird. we get a big vocal, and let's look at the stereo image go bananas here.
All will be revealed.
So the bass never really changes, but everything else comes up around it, and you can see the volume goes crazy. Let's have a look at the loudness on this part.
Through which they sit and wait. All will be revealed.
So looking at the numbers here, it goes from about -16, which is very reasonable, to -10, immediately a 6 dB jump. That's a doubling in volume. That's why tracks find it difficult to do that bigness these days of, you know, the big chorus, because like this song goes from the level the verse is at, it doubles in volume at the chorus. It's got that room on the recording, on the vinyl pressing, whatever, to go to the next level before dropping back out. I mean, yeah, they've thrown the kitchen sink at the instrumentation as well. Let's listen to the right hand side, because there's an extra guitar comes in that's really bright. And if we listen to the left instead. So there's loads of layers going on. There is at least one guitar, if not two, doing that blah, 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 blah. But underneath it, I can now hear on the left-hand side a different guitar that's kind of baked in, that's much lower, going kind of da 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 da. And I think there's brass in there as well. Yeah, on the sides, if we take the mid out, we can hear the horns and the strings. The strings are not super loud in that section. Maybe they're being reserved for later, because here we hear the strings really come in now. And now the instrumentation, this, I'm guessing that was just an orchestra that was recorded for this. So different parts would come in, but they were all recorded together, probably with an arrangement that we call a decatry, which is a 3 microphone thing that's kind of flown way up in the room, where there's one in the middle that captures the everything and 2 that poke outside that capture kind of left and right. And you get, because it's in a big orchestra hall, you get this really big effect from that, where you get the really obvious kind of microphone in front of you going, this is an orchestra, but then there's magically just this big size. Because that's woodwind, that's oboes and things like that that are going. They've got a very different timbre to the strings, very different timbre to brass. Okay, so up to there, just before that next chorus type thing comes in, I can hear a little bit that thing on the drums. I think they faded a little bit back in there of the flanger, phaser, whichever one it is. And the brass are really obvious this time round because because of the nature of the way that they've been orchestrated, they're not going ba ba ba. They're going wah 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 and becoming more kind of rude and bright slightly after the hit, which compared to the way that things like guitars naturally have an instant attack is kind of setting them apart. So you might be able to hear that on the top end. So it goes ba wah ba wah ba wah. And at this point, we've got a massive orchestration going. There seem to be more layers on that bit, doing the middle part, that kind of what I would call the fifths part, which is ba 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 ba. And we get to this big bit, we can hear that the orchestra have now been sent to that big reverb plate, because when it goes bananas, we can hear it go ba 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 ba. And there on this section, you can really hear they've pushed up that kind of flangery phaser on the drums. That, but really interesting that the low end isn't there on that kick drum. It's punchy, it's powerful. It doesn't have a bum 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 thing going on, which, because it's such a busy instrumentation on this track, they may have done that as a conscious effort to make sure that they could pack all the instruments in without causing the needle to jump on the record. Because, of course, that was the format destination at the time. There's an obvious bit of that flanger. After that big crash, you'll hear on the drums. And I was wondering if the drums were mono. They're most definitely not. I can hear the hi-hats much clearer on one side, which suggests to me maybe they've used the Glyn Johns technique. But at the time, that was very much an accepted kind of thing and made sense here. This is the sides. And even here, we can hear how there's not a lot of low end on the kick. There's also not a lot of bass. But when the bass comes in here, it's really high up. So the song is, I think the song's in D. And so the bass line actually starts on a high E here. It starts on the 9th, which is weird. It goes ba 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 ba. Here's where it gets really interesting, because those strings on the left, they're not real strings. It's been real strings up to this point, And now John Paul Jones comes in with a thing called a mellotron. Now, for anyone who doesn't know what a mellotron is, it was an absolute game changer in the late 60s, early 70s. It was kind of a big chunky box of a keyboard, but every key on that keyboard was strapped to basically a tape machine. And so when you press play, that one note of maybe an orchestra or a choir or flutes, so where Strawberry Fields Forever's flute sound comes from, would play, and then when you let go, it'd rewind that key. So you could play a few notes of a full like orchestra at a time, or a full string section, or whatever it was you wanted. They were notoriously unreliable, but it meant someone like John Paul Jones could sit in the studio without having to pay for a full orchestra and go, I've got an idea, check this out. How do you think this sounds? And quite often it would stay on the record. Bands like Yes used them a lot. Genesis used them a lot. Beatles used them a lot. Apparently they were an absolute cow to take on tour because they'd break all the time. They were quite, flimsy, not flimsy, but for what they are, which is like 30-something tape machines wrapped inside a box in the early 70s. Something was going to go wrong because that's a lot of moving parts. But anyway, Led Zeppelin were also famous for using them. And on the left, that's John Paul Jones noodling away on a mellotron. So it doesn't sound quite like a real orchestra. And we'll talk about that why a bit more later.
All I see turns to brown as the sun
Let's just solo the right-hand side for a minute.
turns to brown. As the sun burns the ground.
Quietly there, you can hear what I think are the real strings from the orchestra. Maybe later on, John Paul Jones or one of the band decided that they needed more strings in this section, more of an oomph, more of an impact, and they'd already recorded the orchestra and couldn't really go back. So they cracked out the Mellotron, which you can hear on the other side, which is super brash and loud. Super browed.
To brown. As the sun.
That's a really good example here, actually, of how a mellotron sounds compared to a real orchestra, because with a real orchestra, with loads of different players, as they would go, there's a slight bit of kind of slop, a little bit of natural blending of the instruments. As one player starts the next note and the other's not quite there yet, you get this really pleasant flow. Whereas in a mellotron, it's very start-stop. As soon as you take your finger off, it goes... So you get this weird kind of thing, like here.
As the sun burns the ground. And my eyes filled with sand. As I scan
the right-hand side might also be a mellotron, but just lower down. A different orchestra, different tape, a different octave, who knows?
As I scan this wasted life. Trying to find where I've been.
And interestingly, the vocals got so overpowering here that the volume's gone to like -6 LUFS, which is bonkers. A lot of albums won't be mastered to that kind of level. That's super loud, but it's still not clipping, as you can see. And then as he fades down into the rest of the track and the volume really dips off, whoever's done the mixing here is pushing up that reverb as the volume of the vocal goes, so that you get more of that kind of ethereal, floaty effect.
Trace like thoughts inside a dream. He's the path that led me to that place.
And the instrumentation of the orchestra, because that is a real orchestra now, has changed a bit. So there's more brass in there, because now it's going and really starting to not get louder but get meaner. The orchestration and the arrangement is really starting to amp up.
Yellow desert screen, my Shangri-La beneath the summer moon. I will return again. You're as the dust that floats high into when I'm moving through Kashmir.
I think this here is a really good example of why there's not more bass in this track. Because when this blasts out and it's majestic, the volume is at -10, which is like 10 dB from the loudest it could possibly mathematically go. And it's got all this instrumentation going on and it's kind of clear. I mean, the arrangement is still a little messy, but we can hear it all. Whereas if you added like a load more kick drum, a load more bass, that would be so loud. And I actually played with this earlier just as an experiment with a big low bump. Try this. And it kind of sounds nice, but it also sounds strange, and I'm clipping there as well. And so it was definitely a choice that they would have made at the time, I think.
Oh, farther up before winds fill my sails across the sea of fear, with no provision but an open face, blowing the straits of fear.
And I could hear through that whole section that flanger on the drums, the phaser, whichever one it is a bit more now, and you could hear the squelch, the on the drums as they were hit, and that's been left in now as we go. So the orchestra is at full power now, and a lot of the arrangement is relatively low, but also forte or fortissimo, or really kind of giving it some, but not in a high register. So that's where the Telecaster guitar, that bling bling, is sat. So it just sounds bigger and more powerful now, because it's got more authority.
When
there's that Mellotron back, but only on the right-hand side. On the left, there's nothing. Possibly another Mellotron that's just got a very sparse arrangement, whereas on the right it's going crazy. And at the end of that big vocal note, the flanger on the drums is really pushed up to really push it over the edge. Really getting into drum flanger territory now. I'm thinking now that that flanger is only mono and the drums themselves are stereo, which is why when you get that big wishy-washy, that's only coming down the middle. Like there's a big bit here where we can hear that really obvious. Let's try and eliminate it by taking out the mids. That's fascinating. I took out the mids by using the mid side and the whole flanger thing just disappeared. Yeah, there, that digga-da-digga-da-digga-da-digga-da-psh on the snare, without the mids, sounds just like a plain old drum kit. I mean, it sounds like John Bonham, but from a recording perspective, whereas the mids... So that's how they did it, is it would have been a single mono flangey phasey thing, but the drums are in stereo, so the clean drums around it will have given it the rest of that size, and then your brain just fills in the gaps. Really interestingly, just to finish off, on the left here I think is a real orchestra now. Because it just sounds, the attacks and release on the strings sound real with that va, 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 va. It sounds like it's breathing, whereas the one on the right is very fake. The combination of the two sounds wicked, but that's, yeah, a very long song. But there's lots to unpack, and I'm glad we did. So there you go, everybody. Let's click some buttons, and you can see me now. Thank you very much for tuning in. It's been a great song. Thanks, Bill, for the recommendation. If you want to join us on Patreon and help us do more videos like this, then you can do that. The link is in the description. That would be massively appreciated. Patrons and people on our Discord server get first shout as to what songs we're going to do on this. The next one that was suggested on our Discord is going to be San Quentin by Nickelback. Not personally a huge Nickelback fan, but their mixes recently, last few years, have been incredible, and so we're going to focus on the mix. So that's going to be a really interesting one, and we'll see you next week. Thanks everybody for tuning in. See you later.